If we think deeply about it, no film is ever truly original or completely objective. We cannot detach films from everything that surrounds them, from social and cultural contexts to influences of classic films, historical cinematic movements, or genre conventions. One other major influence that is nearly inevitable in a film is the filmmaker's personal touch. No matter how much a director or writer tries to set aside their background or personal views or biases, there's almost always a part of themselves that we can find in the movies that they produce. We can argue that that's the case for every film, or even every story, albeit implicitly. What's interesting though is that some directors go as far as explicitly incorporating parts of their own lives into their movies, but still not to the extent of replicating reality to the point where they become literal autobiographies. It's so fascinating how filmmaking can give directors and writers this ability to portray themselves on screen while also giving room to their imagination that can have no limits. That's what we can call a semi-autobiography. A form of storytelling that blurs the line between fiction and the real account of a person's life. It finds its roots in literature, under what we know as autofiction, derived from autobiographies or memoirs. Perhaps the earliest major example of that is Fyodor Dostoevsky's The House of the Dead, a novel that recounts the author's experiences during his time in a Siberian prison camp, but through the lens of an entirely invented character, and that's why it's known as one of the first fictionalized memoirs. That's more on the narrative side, however. When it comes to visual arts, we can trace the semi-autobiography back to self-portraits, which were common in the early Renaissance, with the example of Portrait of a Man in a Turban, a painting from 1433 by Jan van Eyck, where he represents himself with an incredible detail, but still not in the aim of producing an exact replica of reality. Today, we look at the semi-autobiography through the lens of film, as some of the most notable recent films belong to this category. This video will be exploring what the personal touches of filmmakers can add to our experiences with contemporary cinema. Through very recent films, we can see how directorial debuts often tend to be of a semi-autobiographical nature. That is the case for Past Lives or Riceboy Sleeps. But even if we go back in time, one of the earliest examples of semi-autobiography in film we can find is the 400 Blows by French filmmaker François Truffaut, and it is also a directorial debut. Released in 1959, the movie follows the coming-of-age story of Antoine Doinel, a troubled adolescent living in Paris who struggles with his parents and teachers because of his rebellious nature, which eventually leads him to run away from home. The 400 Blows is inspired by Truffaut's childhood in Paris, where he lived with distant parents and eventually ran away from home at the age of 11, just like the protagonist of the movie. Another interesting quality that the director and the character share is their passion for cinema. This brings us to the first characteristic of semi-autobiographical films, which is the perspective that they provide on filmmaking itself. The main characters of such movies, by virtue of being loose versions of their creators, they tend to have the same passion for cinema, which gets reflected in the film narratively and aesthetically. That is especially true in the case of the 400 Blows, since it is a key work in the French New Wave, which is a late 50s art film movement that had a huge influence on cinema as we know it because of the innovations it introduced. One of its contributions happens to be the introduction of autobiographical elements, with the aim of blurring the line between fiction and reality, inviting us by that to reflect on our understanding of the nature of cinema as a whole. An even more explicit and early example of a semi-autobiographical film commenting on the process of filmmaking is the 1963 surrealist comedy drama 8½, which was directed by the Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini. The movie revolves around a famous Italian film director who suffers from director's block as he tries to make an epic science fiction film. It's easy to tell from this synopsis that the movie is partially based on the experiences of Fellini himself, making it a meta-fictional work in every sense of the word. It takes this very real aspect of the director's life and turns it into a remarkably innovative film that blurs the line between fantasy and reality, weaving together memories, dreams, and fantasies within a non-linear narrative structure that makes it all a truly surreal experience. Another film that speaks to this metafictional, surreal aspect, but which exists in an entirely different historical, geographical, and formal context, is Hayao Miyazaki's latest and allegedly final film, The Boy and the Heron. It's a movie that similarly features a narrative that's loosely inspired by the experiences of the highly regarded filmmaker Miyazaki within the context of contemporary Japanese animation. The Boy and the Heron is a fantasy film that follows the story of a boy named Mahito who moves to the countryside after his mother's death. He discovers an abandoned tower near his home and meets this talking gray heron, with whom he goes on an adventure to a fantasy world. The movie incorporates details from Miyazaki's real life into its fantastic dream logic-driven narrative, and like 8½, it's argued that The Boy and the Heron includes a subtle commentary on animation and Miyazaki's legacy, on filmmaking, and more generally on the process of making art. Another more recent film that includes this broad and subtle commentary on art and storytelling is Celine Song's Past Lives. This is a movie that follows a character named Nora, who immigrates from South Korea to Canada and then to the US, leaving behind her entire childhood, including her first lover, to become a successful writer in New York. This writing aspect is inspired by the experience of the director of the movie, who moved across the 3 countries to become a playwright and then a filmmaker who made Past Lives. Not only are these details reflected in the movie, but even its structure is subtly informed by her experience in writing for theater. The metafictional aspect of her film lies in how it entertains the question of what stories are and what can make them epic or ordinary and boring. This brings us to another quality of semi-autobiographical films, which is their tendency to offer narratives about individual experiences and questions of identity that not all of us are familiar with. In the case of Past Lives, we get insight into the Korean-American immigrant experience from the point of view of this individual who has complicated feelings towards her childhood lover from Korea and her American husband. Another film that offers a perspective on a similar question on identity, but through the lens of a different individual with different family dynamics and social class, is Riceboy Sleeps. This is the directorial debut of Canadian actor and filmmaker Anthony Shim. The film follows the character of So-young, a Korean immigrant single mother raising her teenage son after she moved to Canada with the aim of giving him a better life. This narrative is loosely based on the real-life experience of the director, who was also born in South Korea and moved with his family to Vancouver, Canada. Despite the movie having similarities with Past Lives on the question of immigration, it still provides its own unique perspective thanks to the personal elements incorporated in it, like the characteristics of the setting of Canadian suburbia and the struggles of the working class within that geographical context, particularly in the 1990s. Now, of course, the unique and personal dimension of these works doesn't mean we can't connect to them. On the contrary, the personal nature of these films gives them this sense of authenticity that makes them easier to connect with. No matter how unique they are, there's always an aspect to them that can be universal and speak to all of us as viewers, be it thematically or formally. We may not relate to the immigrant experience in Riceboy Sleeps, but the complicated family dynamics can move something within us. If it's not relatable altogether, the filmmaking tools utilized to make it immersive can break that wall and help us create a connection with the characters. Essentially, that's how films can be one way to generate empathy towards people who go through experiences that are alien to us. Lady Bird is another perfect example of a film that is revered for its relatability on a universal level, despite it being heavily inspired by the personal life of its director, Greta Gerwig. It's a coming-of-age comedy drama that follows the story of a high schooler who calls herself Lady Bird and who lives in the small town of Sacramento, California. She has a complicated relationship with her parents, especially her mother, that gets even more intense when she announces her dream to leave the town and attend a prestigious university in a city of culture somewhere in the East Coast. A dream that is deemed unrealistic because of her family's financial struggles. What Gerwig and her character have in common is their upbringing in the town of Sacramento, to which the film pays homage through its cinematography. Unlike many of the films mentioned in this video, they also share a passion for theater and filmmaking, or art in general, hence the urge to move to a more cultured city. Despite it featuring aspects from the director's personal life, Lady Bird is still a beloved film that many viewers related to and through which they could reflect on their own coming-of-age journeys. A last favorite semi-autobiographical film of mine is Charlotte Wells' 2022 directorial debut, Aftersun, a film that follows a character who revisits the memories of this one vacation trip that she took with her father to a Turkish resort to celebrate his 31st birthday. Among the films mentioned so far, this one is the least direct in terms of its parallels to the personal life of the director Charlotte Wells. That being said, she still described it as emotionally autobiographical, in that while the events of the film don't directly mirror her experiences, the emotions it explores and builds are hers. The perspective she offers on the father-daughter relationship in the movie and the entire experience of revisiting old memories is also claimed to come from a very personal place. In one of her interviews, she states that photographs of her own memories inspired some elements of the film, which indeed incorporated this motive of the photographs. This goes to show that personal touches by directors in their films can come in all shapes and forms, from the environmental to the emotional. The popular reception of Aftersun speaks to its universality and its ability to build those feelings around relationships and memories that we can all be familiar with. So these were some of my favorite semi-autobiographical films. I'd be interested to know what you think of films of this kind, and whether you ever picture what a film that incorporates aspects from your own life would look like. Feel free to share your thoughts down below in the comments, as well as your favorite semi-autobiographical films. Thank you for watching, and see you in another video.